Coming up on Colonial Crossfire, President Trump signs a national emergency. We'll bring you news from the Hill. And President Trump holds his second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Joining us on the left, Mark McKibben. And on the right, Shep Gersberg. And I'm your moderator, Michael Schnell. From the GWTV studios in Washington, D.C., this is Colonial Crossfire. Welcome to this episode of Colonial Crossfire. I'm your moderator, Michael Schnell. Now, it's safe to say that a lot has happened in the past month here in Washington. Last week, President Trump traveled to Hanoi, Vietnam for his second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The president shook hands with the North Korean dictator, and this happened on the same day that Michael Cohen, his former personal attorney, testified before the House Oversight Committee. On the Hill, AOC introduced the Green New Deal, sparking a lot of buzz among lawmakers. And, of course, the president signed a national emergency to secure funds for his border wall. But before taking a deep dive into these topics, let's turn things over to Jessica Nix to hear other key headlines. Jessica?
Thanks, Michael. Wednesday, February 27th, marked the beginning of the Michael Cohen congressional testimony. Cohen, President Trump's former personal lawyer, testified before the House Oversight Committee for 6 hours. It admitted that over the past 10 years, President Trump has asked him to threaten many people about 500 times. Cohen also admitted to lying to Congress and stated that he was no longer protecting the president. Cohen's congressional testimony occurred with rumors that the special counsel's report will come out in the coming weeks. According to a report from Florida Representative Ted Deutsch, thousands of undocumented alien children are facing sexual abuse from other illegal immigrants. When minors cross the border, they are placed in dorms run by the Health and Human Services Department and allowed to run freely, placing children in potentially dangerous situations with other staffers and immigrants. From October 2017 to July 2018, there were 1,261 recorded instances of sexual abuse. Only 412 of those allegations were reported to the Justice Department. Deutsch announced this report during a House Judiciary hearing on President Trump's zero-tolerance immigration policy that led to the House voting to approve a subpoena for data on border separations. Infamous drug trafficker El Chapo was found guilty earlier this month on all 10 counts against him, including engaging in continued criminal enterprise, conspiracy to launder narcotics proceeds, and international distribution of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana. El Chapo faces a life sentence in prison without possibility of parole. Recently, a juror told Vice News that 5 other jurors followed the media coverage of the trial, which was against the judge's rules. El Chapo's defense lawyers are now considering the possibility of a retrial. Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders has officially announced his 2020 candidacy. His platform is similar to his 2016 platform and includes free public college, health care for all, and raising the minimum wage to $15. He rose about $6 million in the first 24 hours of his campaign, so far the most raised in 24 hours compared to all other Democratic candidates. Empire actor Jussie Smollett reported to Chicago police that he was attacked late one night by men yelling racist and homophobic slurs. Smollett reported that the attackers were wearing red Make America Great Again hats and stated that he was cooperating fully with the authorities. The Chicago police stated that Smollett was reluctant to reveal information of the attack and that the men were dressed in all black with no mention of MAGA hats. In the housing raid of 2 suspects, they found evidence that connected Smollett to the suspects. The suspects told police that they were hired by Smollett and helped them orchestrate the crime because Smollett was upset that a racist letter sent to the studio where Empire is filmed did not receive enough attention. Smollett has now turned himself into the Chicago police and faces a felony of filing a false claim. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Jessica. On February 15th, President Trump from the Rose Garden declared a national emergency to receive full funding for his border wall on the U.S.-Mexico border. But he also signed a spending bill to prevent another government shutdown. Were both necessary? Our student panel is here to discuss this and more. Joining us on the left, Mark McKibben, a junior from Sacramento, California, majoring in political communication. Mark is currently in the Governance Studies program at the Brookings Institution and a former employee at the chair's office of the Democratic National Committee. And on the right, Shep Gersberg, a junior from Highland Park, New Jersey, majoring in international affairs. Shep is the debate coordinator for the GW College Republicans. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Of course. In an unexpected move, President Trump signed a spending bill and declared a national emergency, all in the same day. And of course, this occurred after the historic 35-day shutdown of the U.S. government. Why did he need both? Well, congressional Democrats gave the president $1.375 billion for his border wall in their proposed spending bill, but he demanded $5.7 billion. So, to secure the remaining funds, he announced a national emergency. But as was expected, the national emergency declaration received a lot of backlash in Congress. A resolution to block the national emergency passed in the House, of course because the chamber is blue, and now it heads to the Senate. Mark, we'll start with you. Do you think that it was smart for President Trump to declare this national emergency?
Well, Michael, I think this national emergency is a larger part of President Trump's plan. From the beginning, the wall has been a rallying cry, frankly, for people who are fearful of the browning of America. And so Donald Trump believes that this will rev up his core supporters, and he's fulfilling a promise to his base. So I think for him, it is smart. In the long run, we will see.
So you think that his main reason for declaring it was to please that base and fill that campaign promise?
Yes, I do.
Okay, Shep, what are your thoughts?
Honestly, let's be real here. If Trump didn't get the border wall, he had no chance in 2020. His base would abandon him, as you said. 100% it was to appeal to his base. Personally, I'm neutral on the wall. It could work. I think it might not. It'd just be as a statistics as to where most illegal immigrants, how they get into the country. Most of them are people who've overstayed their visas. I don't think it's worth the money we spend on it, but at the same time, we've wasted a heck of a lot more money on a heck of a lot stupider stuff. Now, to address the specific national emergency, honestly, I'd go even further. You said we'll see how bad it is. I think we already know how bad it is. It's such a detrimental decision to the country, and we're seeing even Senate Republicans come out against it. Marco Rubio's come out against it because it's such a bad decision. It's such a bad precedent. We're already hearing Democrats say, well, if you did this, we can use this to push through, say, a Green New Deal or gun control by declaring national emergencies in regards to climate change and gun violence. It's such an awful precedent that basically every single way that this goes, it's a lose-lose-lose. Because if the national emergency goes through, then we see an issue of this precedent being set. If it's overruled in the courts, then we see an issue of, let's say in the future there is an actual national emergency, we're seeing the possibility of that actual national emergency being overruled in the courts. So that sets a bad precedent. There's literally no way for this to end up good for anyone, no matter how this goes. If Congress intervenes, we're seeing an issue where a future, again, normal national emergency can be overruled by Congress. So every single way that this went was a bad decision. This was a bad decision by President Trump to declare the national emergency, and I think it sets a very dangerous precedent. Now, that being said, I think that we've kind of hyped up certain aspects of it. I think that a lot of his base doesn't necessarily support a wall because they're scared of a browning of America, but more because of overplayed, overhyped potential violence.
So
and
I
want
to jump in there, and I want to bring up the idea of separation of powers.
Yeah.
Under the Article 1 of the Constitution, the legislative branch oversees appropriations. Now, President Trump is coming in with this national emergency, and he's going to be taking funds from disaster relief, from the military to go to his wall. What does this say about the separation of powers? And you had mentioned the word precedent. What do you think this will leave a precedent for future administrations? Shep, we'll go to you first.
Absolutely, it leaves a precedent. Now, let's be clear here. Presidents have circumvented Congress before. Obama did it in order to get the Iran deal through. But at the same time, he didn't declare a national emergency to do so. And this sets a very dangerous precedent in as far as I was discussing earlier, that it sets a precedent for other presidents because, again, Republicans have to remember, and this is my own party, we have to remember that we won't be holding on to the White House forever. Even if Trump wins re-election, the longest, every party eventually loses the White House. That's just how our system works. And so we have to remember that what we do in office now sets precedent for future Democratic presidents, and there will be future Democratic presidents, no matter how much Republicans like to think that we'll hold on to the White House forever.
So I want to let Mark jump in here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of what Shep said. Look, this is a win for the Democrats either way. Like, if Trump will lose in court.
It's a loss for America. It's not a win for the Democrats.
I mean, yes, that's true. That's also true. Look, if Trump loses in court, it'll be another humiliating defeat with him in a series of humiliating defeats. But if Trump wins in court, it'll be an interesting redefining of the executive power, and I think it'll also set future precedent for Democratic presidents to declare a national emergency.
All right, so a resolution, as we had mentioned, to block President Trump's national emergency passed through the House, and now Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has until March 16th, which is 18 days after the House passed the resolution, to vote on the issue. It is expected to pass in the Senate by a simple majority, which will then mean it will end up on the president's desk, which will most likely lead us to President Trump's first ever veto. Here's Trump on the situation.
Will I veto it? 100%. 100%. And I don't think it survives a veto. We have too many smart people that want border security, so I can't imagine it could survive a veto, but I will veto it, yes.
So, Mark, we're going to start with you. How will this presidential veto, if it happens, it's pretty likely it will happen, how will that play out? Will it be brought into the court system? And then at the end of the day, what will be the final decision on the national emergency?
I think it will be brought into the courts because I think President Trump will veto it, and there is not enough votes in Congress, I don't think, to override the president's veto, which is a pretty dramatic reversal from Republicans who constantly decried President Obama using executive action. So it's pretty hypocritical. But with that said, I think it'll go to the courts. We'll see if it gets to the Supreme Court, and we'll see how they rule. This might be an opportunity for John Roberts to show that he is independent from show that the judiciary is independent, and to even though its view is hard right. So we'll see what happens in the courts. I'm honestly not sure. I think the Federal Emergency Powers Act is vague in regard to this, and so we'll see what the legal standing is in a few months.
Shep, what do you think the future is?
Yeah, I agree. I think that I think we'll have a vote in the Senate. It'll pass the Senate. It'll get to his desk. He'll veto. What happens after the veto is interesting. The question then becomes, how much are Senate Republicans willing to go against Trump? I know that many Republicans have said, and by many I mean there are say 50, but about 8 have said that they would be willing to vote against the resolution, which is why we're expecting the simple majority. But at the end of the day, I don't think there's enough for, as you said, an overturn. And again, I agree. I think it's wrong for us not to overturn the veto because, again, I think that I fully agree with you that we justly, in my opinion, decried Obama's overreaches. We have to do the same with Trump, and this is an overreach. Now, the question of when it gets to the courts is an interesting one because, again, as you said, it's so vague, the idea of how the president, what defines a national emergency. It's such a vague concept in our Constitution that this is an issue where it probably would be best for the Supreme Court to make a decision on it because they haven't really in the past as much. So this is an area where they should probably make a decision. We should get clarification on what exactly this means, if only to limit the precedent. But I genuinely don't know what will happen when it gets to the Supreme Court. I hope it gets struck down because it's the lesser of the two evils. It's still an evil because, as I said, it could lead to precedent where the courts can intervene in a legitimate national emergency. But at the end of the day, this is a very problematic issue, and Trump really should not have declared this. I mean,
yeah, I think there's.
He calls himself the best negotiator ever. He couldn't get himself the money he wanted.
Yeah, I think there's two big takeaways from this. Number one is that President Trump is doing this because he's been a failure in Congress. He has failed to work with Republicans. He has failed to work with Democrats. He couldn't do it under Republican Congress, so he tried to blame the Democrats, and he failed. And this is also an unprecedented use of power. This is something where national emergencies that have been in the past have been declared over things that have broad bipartisan consensus. This is an overtly political national emergency.
Listen, I know why Trump did it. We all know why Trump did it. He needs this wall in order to even come close to re-elect, in order to keep his base. But the fact of the matter is that this was a selfish move by his part because he's really hurting the country here. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how much are we going to respond to this? And at the same time, we have to ask ourselves, what does this mean for the future of the country and for the past of the country? I don't think it's unprecedented. I think that a lot of what Obama did is actually kind of similar. It's not national emergency, but it's similar.
Did he declare a national emergency?
No, but he circumvented Congress in order to push through his legacy-defining Iran deal.
But my point is that was not viewed from that was not done through the national emergency powers. It was done through executive action.
Yes, national emergency is unprecedented, but let's not pretend like Obama and other presidents haven't overreached their power.
So I want to jump in here. Right now, Senate Democrats have three Senate Republicans who are definitely going to vote on their side: Susan Collins, Lisa Murkowski, and Tom Tillis. They need one more to get that simple majority to be able to pass this ban resolution, who do you really quickly? Who do you think that fourth Senate Republican will be?
Marco Rubio.
I mean, I think there are about a dozen Senate Republicans who it could be. Cory Gardner's interesting. We'll see. I mean, we'll see if Joni Ernst does it. I mean, I don't know who it'll be. But if we're talking about 12 Republicans who are undecided, who are wavering, who don't want to support the president on this, I think it's likely that not just one, but a couple will defect in the end.
And my last question is, of course, everything we talk about in terms of Trump these days, at the end of the day, relates back to 2020 and his campaign for re-election. So how do you think declaring this national emergency will work with his constituents, and how do you think it'll affect him in 2020 when he runs for re-election? Shep, we'll go to you first.
So the fact of the matter is that Trump needs his base in order to come close. This helps him shore up his base, who was starting to abandon him because of the lack of the wall. I mean, we see famous supporters of him start to criticize him because he was failing to get the wall. Now, that being said, there's a larger issue here, is the fact that his base is not enough to gain re-election. He needs the 20% of Republicans who don't particularly like him all that much. I'm one of them. And he needs independents and moderates. And I think that this is an area where he is driving those people away. Trump already has his base. However much individuals are going to defect, he has his base well sewn up. This is a problem for him in 2020 because all he's doing is driving away moderates and independents, which will only hurt his chances in 2020.
Mark, what does the national emergency mean for 2020?
Well, the national emergency, Donald Trump plays to his base, and he's going to get his base to vote for him, and they would have voted for him anyway. But everyone else who he alienates through his rhetoric and these kind of actions are just going to be further driven away from him. So ultimately, I think it will hurt him in 2020. But that is the least of Donald Trump's problems in 2020, considering Michael Cohen's testimony.
All right, and we'll have to end our segment there, but after this, we'll head over to Capitol Hill and break down the news coming from Congress. Stay tuned.
You guys ready?
Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, ready?
Let's go.
Welcome.
Wait, do you want me to go or?
I thought I was going.
No,
No, you go. You go.
Sean and Michael,
Yeah,
why
well,
don't you guys?
yeah,
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Welcome to GW.
I thought I was supposed to
I
start.
thought I was gonna go first.
I thought
Here comes Parker.
Come on, guys. It's not that hard, all right? It's just one line. All right. You guys know the line.
Welcome to GWTV.
You can visit us at gw-tv.com.
See, that wasn't so bad.
Welcome back. We're now going to take you inside the halls of Capitol Hill with our new segment, News from the Hill. Freshman Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez introduced the Green New Deal, which received much backlash. A bill requiring universal background checks on gun purchases passed in the House. It will now be voted on in the Senate. Ilhan Omar, another freshman representative, was accused of tweeting anti-Semitic tropes. And Representative Matt Gaetz is being investigated by the Florida Bar for sending a threatening tweet. We've got a lot to get to, so let's get this started. We'll start out simple. Do you guys think that the Green New Deal is a smart deal? Shep, we'll go to you first.
No, not in the slightest. And first of all, let's call it what it really is. Bernie Sanders' platform from 2016. Because there's about 40% of this thing that covers green energy and climate change stuff. The rest of it is the Democratic Economic Plan from 2016. Okay, let's start there. So let's call it what it really is. Second of all, let's look at what this thing is supposed to cost, because my God, price is everything. If you can't pay for something, you can't do something. The American Action Forum, which is run by the former director of the CBO, and I'll acknowledge it's center right, but at the same time it is center right, has said that this thing in its totality will cost between $51 and $93 trillion over 10 years. Our current national debt is $22 trillion. Our current yearly budget is around $4 trillion. This would require such a massive expansion of our budget that I have no idea where Democrats are planning to get the money from. Not only that, half of what they're proposing is simply impractical or impossible under current science. I mean, most environmental scientists say that we can't do a lot of what it's talking about in regards to lowering emission standards by 2050. They're proposing 2030. So it's just completely impractical on every level. And so proposing it is just a waste of everyone's time.
We're going to get to the pricing of it after, but I first want to get to Mark. What do you think?
Well, I appreciate that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey recognizing that we need to accelerate the transition to renewable energy, and this is a plan which they do that. I think I'm grateful, frankly, to be part of a political party that actually has ideas on how to deal with climate change rather than just denying it.
Not everyone in the Republican Party denies it.
Yes, but well, most of them do. And so So I think a couple things with this deal. Number one is that it's really important to understand what this is and what this isn't. This is not a piece of legislation. So when Mark Meadows goes to the CPAC and says, oh, all the cows are going to be killed, well, number one, that's not in the legislation, and number two, it's not a law. This is a vision document for the Democratic Party, which we will use to talk about and debate ideas on how to deal with climate change. And responding to Shep's point about how to pay for it, I find Republican arguments about paying for things and wasting money a little bit disingenuous after they passed $1 trillion tax cut that largely went to people that don't need it.
So I actually
and gave the military money they didn't ask for.
I want to jump in here, and we're going to have to move on to H.R. 8, which is a piece of legislation that was passed in the House that included universal background checks for gun owners. So first question is, do you think that the bill will pass in the Senate, considering that we're kind of in a new era in terms of gun legislation these days, and the feelings around that? We have the March for Our Lives. We've had unfortunately several mass shootings in the past months and years. In addition to this is the first piece of massive legislation that has been brought up and kind of been looked at, and possible with some bipartisan working. So do you think that it will be passed in general? Mark, we'll go to you first.
It will not pass the Senate. But the point of having a Democratic House is not to get legislation signed by the president. The point of it is to offer an alternative vision to what the Republicans have put in place in this country, and basically say that we are for the Second Amendment, but we also want to make sure that we are not snatching birthdays away from parents for kids and families who are losing members because of gun violence. So I think this bill will not pass the Senate, but the point of it is to provide an alternative vision and to tell the American people what Democrats will do if they have unified control of government.
Shep, what are your thoughts?
I hope it passes. I don't think it will. I think that Republicans are too scared of basically giving an inch, and then Democrats will take a mile on this issue. I think they're scared of that. I don't think it'll pass. I hope it passes. I support universal background checks. It's funny to me, the fear over universal background checks is actually the opposite in regards to parties over what happened when stop and frisk happened in New York. Republicans, in supporting that, used to always say, if you have nothing to hide, why are you scared about it, right? If you have nothing to hide, why are you scared of a background check? We should have background checks, universal background checks. I agree with that. I think Republicans are just scared of giving an inch on this issue and scared that Democrats will take a mile.
So I want to actually jump in there quickly. So you both agreed that you don't think it'll pass in the Senate. What provisions have to be added to the bill, and what has to be taken out in the bill, do you think, to get that Republican support?
Well, I think, so number one, the reason why Republicans are not going to vote for it is because the National Rifle Association owns the Republican Party. And the reality is
there aren't lobbies that own the Democratic Party. That's totally not the
but
case.
we're talking about the National Rifle Association right now. I think the thing is that the NRA will not support any legislation which does even anything to minimize the profits that gun manufacturers and gun sellers make, even if it will save lives. So I look at any arguments that the NRA, and frankly politicians that are bought and paid for by the NRA, is arguments in bad faith. And the fact is that, frankly, saving lives is not their priority. And so and that's why I'm not a Republican.
Shep, do you think any changes could be made to the bill to get that Republican support?
I don't think so. I think that, again, I think it's problematic. I think that Republicans need to take a hard look at our policy on gun control and the influence that the NRA has. I do think that we need to do so. I think that Democrats more than Republicans like to point that we're bought and paid by X, but both parties are. That's just the facts. But the fact of the matter is that we need to look at, as Republicans, we need to look at how we handle gun control. And I think that Democrats and Republicans need to come together on this issue, and they need to talk about this issue more. Because, as I said, the Republican fear, the reason why a lot of Republicans who aren't necessarily getting money from the NRA, but even they don't necessarily support legislation like this, is because they're terrified of that the Democrats, because there are people on the far left of the Democratic Party who are more into attacking the Second Amendment than you seem to be. They aren't the majority, but they exist, and they can be vocal sometimes.
So I want to jump in here.
It's just a fear. It's just a fear.
We are running out of time. We can't talk about gun legislation without mentioning the NRA. How do you think the NRA will react to, A, the fact that this is actually passed through the House and then it's on the Senate floor and it's being considered?
I mean, the NRA is doing what they're always doing. They're talking. They're going on Twitter. They're basically saying that, any reasonable gun legislation is going to be taking away your Second Amendment rights. I mean, so I care less what the NRA says than that NRA-funded politicians get voted out of office. And I'm very encouraged by the fact that in the 2018 elections, groups that support the reduction of gun violence outspent the NRA. And I think that says something really to the nature of public opinion in our country, and it's changing. And the reality, and parents are getting greater priority than gun sellers in terms of lives.
Shep?
What's the NRA doing? I mean, again, you said it exactly. They're doing what they always do. They tweet. They support various politicians in local and state elections. I mean, they're not going to change what they do simply because this has hit the Senate. They do what they're always doing, which is just being a lobbying group, which is legal in our country, by the way.
All right, so we're going to move on to our next topic. On February 11th, freshman Representative Ilhan Omar tweeted anti-Semitic tropes. She received criticism from both sides of the aisle. The representative tweeted, quote, "It's all about the Benjamins, baby," in response to a tweet by Glenn Greenwald that discussed Ilhan and a fellow congresswoman being critical of Israel. When asked what her response meant, she wrote, quote, "AIPAC," in capital letters with an exclamation point. AIPAC is, of course, the American Israeli Public Affairs Committee. Basically, she was saying that AIPAC pays politicians to support Israel. Here's President Trump's response to the tweets.
Anti-Semitism has no place in the United States Congress. And Congressman Omar is terrible what she said. And I think she should either resign from Congress or she should certainly resign from the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
Shep, will ask you first. Do you think that Representative Omar should resign from the House Foreign Affairs Committee, or would you even take it a step further and say she should resign from Congress overall?
She should resign from Congress overall. She is an unrepentant anti-Semite, and she should be punished by if she refuses to resign, she should be, in the same way Steve King was for his comments, be punished by the party at large. She should be stripped of her seats in committees, and frankly, we should treat her the same way that we treated Steve King. This is reprehensible. Because not only did she say this, which is harping on the worst anti-Semitic tropes, this isn't even the first time she's done it. She's tweeted out Israel has hypnotized the world before, which harps on a different anti-Semitic trope of Jewish power and the Elders of Zion type conspiracy. Not only that, she apologized, and then 2 nights ago she went and said, I want to talk about the political influence in this country that says it's okay to push for allegiance to a foreign country, which harps on a different anti-Semitic trope of Jews being dual loyal to the US and Israel. The fact that she's asking Jews to prove their allegiance to this country by saying, we're pushing for allegiance to a foreign country, when if a single person said that because she was born in Somalia, she has some sort of dual allegiance to the US and Somalia, they would be pilloried in the streets. The fact that there's any sort of double standard, if the Democrats don't act on this, they lose any right to call out Trump for his racism, to call out any Republican for their racism. Otherwise, they are being completely hypocritical. Democrats need to act on this now, or else they lose any moral ground on this issue. She's an unrepentant anti-Semite, and someone needs to act.
Mark, what are your thoughts?
Well, I thought Representative Omar's comments were offensive, and there's no two ways about it. I think, obviously it is incredibly important that we are sensitive in our comments to the United States' important alliance with Israel. But I also want to say something on the broader sense that, look, for Democrats, having people, if we want to have people of color in our party, that means accounting for diverse viewpoints. And Representative Omar has brought some interesting and important views to the table, I think, especially related to her questioning of Elliott Abrams.
So is Trump. Doesn't stop you from calling him racist every 5 minutes.
Well, but continuing on, I think she has brought some interesting and important views to the table. And the reality is that Representative Omar's comments were offensive. But I think it's also important to note that you can criticize AIPAC and you can criticize Benjamin Netanyahu.
100%.
And I think, and the Democratic Party is having a conversation with itself about these issues, about how to talk about.
If Republicans didn't punish Steve King, Democrats would have been so up in the air. You have to do that. You have to treat both sides equally. I'm sorry, you have to. This isn't criticizing Israel or criticizing AIPAC. She's harping on anti-Semitic tropes. Last night's comments weren't harping about Israel. 2 nights ago's comments weren't about Israel. They were about the supporters of Israel in this country claiming that they have a dual allegiance. That is not okay.
I want to give Mark 10 seconds to comment, and then we have to move on.
Look, Steve King has been a racist for years, and they're only
condemning him now. So is she. This is 3 strikes, you're out.
I think. Look, Representative Omar is having a conversation with leaders and with her constituents about what is respectful to say in the public sphere and what is not, and that is important.
She apologized and didn't wait 2 weeks to say another anti-Semitic comment.
All right, and that's the last word we'll be able to have on that. But after this break, it's rapid fire. Stay with us.
Universities like George Washington play a critical role in hosting debate and discourse on events of the day.
The right answer is not to refuse the other. The right answer is not to say, get rid of this religion. It's not part of us. It's wrong.
I think that the story of America is a story of race. So when I think of the questions that I'm asking or the stories that I'm going to write, I'm thinking, okay, well, what are we learning about our country?
Well, I think the likelihood of him being indicted is close to 100%. There was a lot of hurdles that had to be cleared in order for that to happen.
One of the reasons that Donald Trump is president is because there is such a frustration with the way that Washington functions.
Sympathy is one thing, but empathy is the language of recovery, and it's something that's without a doubt instilled into every person that's in recovery.
It's never lead with the positive, it's always lead with the perceived negative.
Well, that is part of the problem. I mean, I actually would agree with you on that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. One of the things that we have seen that is most under siege in this country is the notion of civil discourse, and we here at GW, among other things, very much want to stand for that.
This is truly an only at GW moment.
Our panel joins us now again for Rapid Fire, some quick answers to some quick questions. Last week, President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, testified before Congress for 3 days, once in an open hearing with the House Oversight Committee. Reports say that Cohen is returning to the Hill this week to answer more questions behind closed doors. The first question we'll ask will go to Mark. What do you think the testimony meant for the Mueller investigation and President Trump's administration overall?
Michael Cohen accused Trump of 14 felonies in this hearing, and I think it was unbelievable. I mean, for a president who says no collusion, I mean, and collusion is not a crime, but conspiracy to defraud the United States is. So it was pretty unbelievable, and frankly, I think it confirms what we've said about Donald Trump all along. It calls for his immediate removal from office, especially if the facts are corroborated by the Mueller report. And yeah, I'm appalled, but I am not surprised.
Shep?
Yeah, he talked about immediate removal from office. I think we need to take a step back here and just wait for the Mueller investigation. That's all I'm asking for. I don't know whether Trump committed these crimes. Michael Cohen's testimony was very interesting. And I think that if his statements are corroborated by the Mueller investigation, which is our best chance of getting any sort of factual resolution here, then I think that, yes, we should look at impeachment. I think that we just need to hold the brakes, not try for impeachment right now in reaction to the testimony, because I think that we have to be sure that we get this right. And I think that we need to wait for the Mueller investigation to finish, otherwise we're jumping the gun way too much. If the Mueller investigation shows him to be innocent, don't impeach. If it shows him to be guilty, impeach. It's just that simple.
And it's important that the Mueller report is made public so everyone can see it.
I agree with that.
Also last week, it really was quite the week. President Trump traveled to Hanoi, Vietnam for his second summit with North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. He had hoped to leave with a denuclearization deal and an end to the Korean War, but this was just not the case. Instead, he cut the trip short and left empty-handed. Another issue we have to talk about, especially coming after comments and statements last week, is the issue with Otto Warmbier. Otto Warmbier, of course, he was studying in North Korea, college student, and in 2016 he was taken as a prisoner there for trying to steal a propaganda poster off a wall. In 2017, after negotiations, Otto was sent back to the United States, and when he arrived in the United States, he was in a coma from neurological injury, and then, unfortunately, he passed away. So Otto Warmbier's parents came out with a statement last week that I'm going to read. They said, I'm going to read in its entirety. I think it's important. Quote, "We have been respectful during the summit process. Now we must speak out. Kim and his evil regime are responsible for the death of our son Otto. Kim and his evil regime are responsible for unimaginable cruelty and inhumanity. No excuse or lavish praise can change that." So what is to say with President Trump going to meet with Kim Jong-un, having his second summit with him during his administration, only his first administration? So if he becomes reelected, there could be more. What does that say after he sided with Kim Jong-un and said, did not know anything about Otto Warmbier, what happened to him, and Trump said, that's what Chairman Kim said. I believe him. What does this say about the Trump and Kim relationship, about the U.S.-North Korea relationship? There's a lot to unpack here. Just what are your thoughts? Shep, we'll go to you first.
It's disgusting, frankly, that President Trump agreed with a vicious dictator over every sort of knowledge that we have. We shouldn't be working to have summits with North Korea. We should be working towards deposing the Kim regime. But we don't even have to do it with military action. There are plenty of very interesting proposals that I've read of how to do it. One of them includes dropping millions and millions of counterfeit North Korean money over their border in order to completely create hyperinflation and devalue their currency, forcing them to index their currency to a foreign market that can then control them. We should be working towards deposing the brutal North Korean regime that is absolutely the evil of our time. We shouldn't be working. Obviously, denuclearization is an important issue, and that we should be concerned about it. But at the same time, to normalize this regime, and especially to absolve it of guilt in the death of an American, is absolutely disgusting, and Trump should be ashamed of himself. We should be working towards deposing him, not shaking his hand.
Mark?
Well, first of all, I want to express my condolences to President Trump on the death of his future Nobel Peace Prize. But second, I agree with everything Shep said. It was a very disgusting comment. But the larger point is that this is indicative, and this is symbolic of, frankly, Trump's siding with despots over the intelligence community and over what American officials say. And it's very dangerous, and it comes from, frankly, Donald Trump wants to be president for life, and he admires people who disregard the rules and the Constitution of the country over our allies, and he treats Kim Jong-un better than he would Justin Trudeau or Angela Merkel. And frankly, I think it's incredibly shameful.
All right, we're going to move on to our next question. The deadline to increase tariffs on Chinese imports was originally set for March 1st, but last week, President Trump decided to postpone this cutoff date. Do you think this was a smart negotiating tactic by Trump? Mark, you first.
Could you repeat the question?
Do you think this was a smart negotiating tactic made by Trump?
The China tariffs?
Yes.
Look, I mean, I think look, the China tariffs are ridiculous. No one besides Donald Trump, Peter Navarro, and Robert Lighthizer say that trade deficits matter. And the fact is that I just think, look, I'm glad the tariffs were postponed, but the larger policy of trying to win a trade war, you cannot win a trade war, and I think it's ridiculous.
Jep?
I'm happy he's postponed raising the tariffs. I think tariffs as a concept are ridiculous. I am a free trader through and through. Free trade is a rising tide that raises all ships. I think that the way Trump has treated free trade goes against everything that Republicans should believe in, as conservatives who believe in less government. Tariffs are simply another form of taxes. The money on them simply gets passed on along to the consumer. It hurts everyone, and it's a dumb policy. And I'm happy he did this, and honestly, I hope he comes out with a trade deal in this that lowers all tariffs to zero. I don't think it'll be the case, but I can always hope.
All right, so our final question. More candidates are throwing their hats in the ring for the 2020 Democratic nomination, if we even thought that was possible to have more people running. And President Trump is still the front runner among Republicans. We asked this question last episode, and we'll ask it again because still isn't an answer. Who will be on the Democratic ticket in 2020, and will Trump be running against somebody for the Republican primary? Shep, you first.
Trump already is running against someone for the Republican primary, Bill Weld. I don't think he stands much of a chance, but he is running. As for the Democrats, I mean, they haven't even reached the level of the Republican table in 2016. More people will throw their hats in. Frankly, the only one I'm concerned about hasn't even thrown his hat in yet, Joe Biden. I think he's the only one who can beat Trump in 2020, and I think he can beat him handily. I think that the worst mistake Democrats can make in 2020 is nominating out a Sanders or a Warren, who will drive the 20% of Republicans who don't want to vote for Trump into Trump's arms and drive away moderates. I think that in the end, they likely will nominate someone like Kamala Harris, who is left but not too left. I think that Beto makes a dangerous VP candidate, but I'm not sure who the VP candidate will be. But I think in the end, likely someone like Harris will come out of the Democratic primary, but I'm not too concerned about her. Frankly, I think Trump will beat her. The only one I'm really concerned about is Joe Biden, who I think will announce in the coming weeks.
So Bill Weld is running, but do you think that any substantial Republican candidates who have a chance of dethroning Trump will throw their hat in?
I don't think anyone has a chance of dethroning Trump. Unfortunately, I would love a true primary challenge to Trump. I don't necessarily agree with Trump, and I agree with a lot of other Republicans a lot more than Trump. I don't think that in the end many other Republicans will. I hope more Republicans look toward Bill Weld. He's an interesting candidate for the Republicans' future.
All right. Mark, the primary ticket and Republicans for 2020.
Just so you know, Shep, it's Kamala.
I apologize.
No, it's all good. Just a PSA for everyone in America. Anyway, but look, I think the Republican Party has become the party of Trump. The RNC has basically stonewalled everyone and bullied everyone into voting for him at their committee. And so I don't think there's going to be a legitimate Republican Party challenge to Donald Trump unless he is removed from office and Mike Pence is the candidate. But on the Democratic side, I think, frankly, this early, we have to see who jumps in. I think it's way too early to pick a candidate. What I think is a more interesting conversation in the Democratic primary is what are the ideas they're proposing? I disagree with Shep. I don't think that the way for Democrats to win is by running to the middle and embracing Republican policies. When Democrats win an election, we shouldn't feel like we've lost. And so I think
I'm not saying be Republican. I'm saying be a moderate Democrat.
Well,
There's a difference.
But you know, I mean, but I think the thing is that look, I want to see a progressive. I want to see someone who embraces single-payer healthcare, who has radical, excellent ideas for clean energy. I want to see someone who is serious about reducing gun violence, and someone who is willing to make the changes to Congress, who is willing to push for the changes to Congress, like eliminating the legislative filibuster, to make progressive legislation happen. So that's what I'm looking for. I want to see someone who has the right policy, and they tell a compelling story about America.
All right, well, we're going to have to end our segment there, but Mark McKibben, Shep Gersberg, thank you guys so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
When we come back, Willow Hassan has our debate fact check. Stay with us.
Do you want to just practice fake headlines, do our anchor voices?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah?
Okay.
On this week's episode of G Week, there is another election scandal.
And former Vice Provost Peter Kay has been spotted back on campus rocking a brand new bandana. Boy, does he look sharp.
And this year's Spring Fling performer is anticipated to be none other than the Cash Me Outside girl, Behad Behabi.
Catch all this and more on G Week.
Yeah, this is stuff that would probably happen at GW.
Yeah, I think so too.
Welcome back. During our panel discussion, a team of fact-checkers monitor our debate. Willow Hassan is here to fill us in on what we missed. Willow.
Thanks, Michael. In today's show, the debaters came prepared, but there are a few quick clarifications that need to be made. At one point during the debate, Shep said that about 8 senators announced that they will vote against Trump's resolution. Although a few senators have come out and spoken against the resolution, the exact number is a speculation, and sources differ on which senators are possibly voting against the national emergency. Shep then alluded to the idea that Obama used the national emergency to pass his Iran deal, and Mark was accurate in his correction that the Iran deal was passed through executive action. That's all from the Fact Check team. Back to you, Michael.
Thanks, Willow. All right, well, that's all for this episode of Colonial Crossfire. Be sure to check us out online at www.gw-tv.com and follow us on Twitter and Instagram and like us on Facebook. For all of us here at GW TV, I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for getting caught in the crossfire with us. We'll see you right back here next time.